speaker is David MacFadyen from UCLA. Is a music and arts professor and will explain NFTs, the non-fungible tokens, and how they are transforming the ownership rights in music and the arts. David is the author of multiple books on the history of Slavic literature and music, especially the popular traditions of Russia, Ukraine, Belarus. And he's a professor that has many interests, wide interests, and hold positions in comparative literature and musicology departments at UCLA. And he has been offering classes that include musical, literary, cinematic, and technical issues of the rapidly changing world. With that, I'm pleased to introduce David MacFadyen.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Excellent. Here we go. So thank you for the introduction. Thank you for having me here today. First thing I shall say, as it's probably self-evident already, but I have no background in computer science. My background, as we've heard, is in literature and the arts. So what I'm going to say today should demystify a great deal of what's been discussed, and I'm going to make things as simple as possible because that's how I learned about them in the first place. So what we've heard from the speakers today so far, from Dante and then from Dr. David earlier on, I'm sort of Dr. David 2.0, is that the blockchain is what? It's blocks of what? It's blocks of time. And if you can imagine that, it's a block of information about what happened to a digital asset, as they say. So to an image, a photograph, a piece of data, somebody's medical records, a legal document, anything you want to protect. So all the things that have been done either to that file or to other files that people are sharing in a group, and then you lock it into a block of information, and then you lock it shut so that it becomes a commonly shared historical document about what happened to these things over time. And then when it's finished, you move on and you start creating the new one because new things are being done to this asset. And then you go and you create this long, immutable, as they say, or unchangeable record of what you have all done together with these things that you are sharing. So the value for that is that it makes it very, very difficult to lie about the truth of what has happened to these things. So let's say we are doctors in different hospitals and we don't want to share publicly the information about our patients' records, but we want to share those records between ourselves, then we can do that securely because we can not only lend it to one another in a safe way, but also we can prove over time who has accessed those records. So the records are lent by myself to you, and then maybe you lend them to another colleague, but nobody in between is able to access those records without that being recorded in the history. So you can see whether or not the file was treated as it was supposed to be treated. So there's a one-word term that's very useful here that describes what we're talking about, which is provenance. So provenance is basically the origin. So what is the history of the thing that we are sharing? And there are some wonderful examples, for example, of fruit and vegetables. So if I'm the farmer and I send to the local supermarket my fruit and vegetables, we can prove that safely, much like FedEx, when they tell you how to track a document, you can say that the vegetables are indeed from that farm and they were produced on that day and that I'm not being lied about. So if we take that concept into the arts, where in the arts would somebody want to know about the asset of something, a particular asset like a painting or a piece of music? Where would you want to know where it came from? Well, if you take a painting you want to know, was that produced by the artist who made it? Or who owned it before me? If I am told that this painting was owned by this museum, then this museum, you can trust it as something that's worth investing in. You don't want to find out that it was actually produced, it's a forgery and it has no connection to museums in the past. This is a unique book, an antique book, and it wasn't produced 100 years ago. It's a fake, it was made by somebody down the road. These are things you need to prove if you want to find out the truth or the provenance of a work of art, because its value comes from where it has been. Just like a medical record, I only want your medical records if I can prove that the origin of them has come to you from the place that I say it's coming from. So here, I'm just going to drop this in the chat, is a really, really simple explanation of what I'll be talking about today, which are NFTs, so non-fungible tokens. And non-fungible tokens are assets, they are things, they are digital objects that we can share and buy and erase and create that can accrue value over time because you can prove who owns them and where they came from, okay? So the most famous example of a non-fungible token or a thing that has value, one second, would be this. I don't know whether you're aware, but a few months ago, one of the big auction houses in the arts world sold for almost $70 million a digital composite work of art. So this is the work of art that a digital artist did over hundreds of days. It's like, if you like a Pinterest account or like a scrapbook, and he said, I made this image, then this one and this one and this one, and I'm going to put them all together in one huge image. And I'm now going to put it on sale. And I'm going to put it on sale in a way that will allow you, the buyer, to say, I own the original. I can tell you, the buyer, that you are buying the original work. And I'll get into some of the benefits and complications of that in just a second. So what about non-fungible? Let's break this down. NFT, these are these things or assets that are on the blockchain, these little sort of little packages of information. So fungible means what? I'm going to be artsy for a minute. So fungible means, it comes from the Latin word that means to perform. So a fungible, something that's fungible, can perform the behavior or activity or the appearance of something else. It can serve two roles at once. So the example that people always give is a dollar bill. So dollar bills are fungible, right? If I have $10 and they are the money that I've saved, and that those $10 represent my savings, and then I give you the same physical $10 bills, then they represent your savings. So you don't care whether the $10 bills are original or whether they belong to me. So the value of those original, the dollar bills originally was my value, then you take them and it's your value. So they're not unique. I don't care whether we keep swapping dollar bills as long as the amount is the same. So something that's non-fungible is not, it's not unique. In other words, it is unique. So you can't swap it for something else. So we're talking about ways in which something that is a digital object, like a medical record, a painting, a piece of music, can be proven to be unique. You can't swap it for another one because it's the only one. So this is really interesting. What you're saying is, this is a way to stop people copying stuff online. So for music, that's huge because of piracy, right? So this is where it starts to sound very similar to what I was saying about antiques. So if you buy the Mona Lisa, there's only one. If you buy an antique table, there's only one. How can you do that on the internet? So there's only one. If I give you medical records, I want to make damn sure that's the only one. I don't want 50 copies of medical records. And I also want to make sure they come from where I say they came from, that they came from a hospital. So most of these NFTs they exist on the Ethereum blockchain. So we're talking about cryptocurrency. And they mean that the ownership is provable and the provenance is provable. So who owns it and where was it before that and before that and before that? So where can you look in these blocks of information to prove that something is has the history that you say it has. So NFTs can be anything digital or digitizable that people want, and that means that we're talking about with works of art. Let's begin with that, and we'll move into music, into something that people want to own. But the problem is that you often, when you buy an NFT, you don't buy the copyright, and you may not buy the reproduction right. So the example that I gave you, that $69 million painting or digital painting that was bought, it wasn't bought with the copyright or the reproduction right. So that means you own the original, but the artist still has the right to make copies, produce t-shirts, paint it on the side of a building, stick it online, and so on. So the value of NFTs has to be with regard to something that people think it's important to own the original. So the example here that you always find is the Mona Lisa. So you might say, well, why do I want to buy a digital? Let's say the Mona Lisa is a digital painting. Why do I want to buy a digital version of the Mona Lisa and the artist sold it to me when people are making copies of it anyway? And the logic is that, well, perhaps the more times that people make copies of it, the more value it has. So this is where the arts and, let's say, medical data start to go down different roads, right? Because there's no great financial value in my medical records last time I went to see somebody about a stomach ache. But with works of art, they might. So the value of them currently, and these are very, very new, the value of them is in something that people might want to collect. So let me give you an example. Let's take sports collectibles, and I'll drop this in the chat. But here's a company, an Italian company originally, who are moving into the area of sports collectibles. So here we're looking at things like baseball cards. So they're betting on the fact that they can make digital baseball cards, sometimes with moving imagery and sound embedded in them, that people want to own. So that even if somebody copies them, they will still have value. Why? Because they can prove the provenance. So let's say, and this has been true of someone like Wayne Gretzky, right, the hockey player. So Wayne Gretzky says, I am going to release a tiny amount, maybe 1, maybe 2, maybe 20 of these digital collectibles, and they have value because I'm selling you those very, very limited digital assets. People might copy them, but the more they copy them, maybe the value of what I'm selling you will go up because you own the original. So it raises the question in the arts, do you care whether you own the original? If you want a piece of music, is it important to you that you bought it from the artist? Or is it irrelevant because you're happy to get an MP3 from a torrent site or download it, or one of your kids copied it and that's already the 19th or the 20th copy? So in the land of the arts, these non-fungible tokens or non-reproducible tokens only have their significance if you think it's something worth collecting. So Marvel Comics are starting to make them. So we know that in the world of comics, the original paper comic still is something with an enormous amount of value, even if people make millions of digitized copies, because the original physical paper copy does have antique value. And Marvel are reckoning, well, if we release a very small number of these NFTs, then we can make those collectibles as well, as long as you use this technology on the blockchain that makes it very hard for people to lie about where they came from. So if it's an original, you can prove it's original. So if you want to check out some of these places, the 2 places I would recommend where a lot of these NFTs are sold, 1 second. This is the most popular store called Super Rare. And you can look around and say, well, would I pay the amount of money they're asking for some of these NFTs? And the second most popular is called Nifty Gateway. So these are people making digital art that they say is going to have collectible value. That even if people make copies of it, we don't particularly care, because the more copies they make, the more famous it is, and the fact that you own the original one, which is also digital, is going to be significant. So let's drill down quickly into the example of, let's say, music. So people like Grimes and Snoop Dogg have been two of the most active musicians in this area, saying that we are going to officially release a very small number of these digital collectibles, which probably have sound in them. Maybe it's just a music file. And you can do whatever you like with them, but we still have the right to use them similarly. And maybe because we are going to use them at the same time, the fact that you own the original is very important. So who cares about these NFTs? What can you do with them in the world of music apart from collect them? I'll give you some good reasons and some bad reasons about why why these are a good idea and why they're a bad idea. So number one, it's been suggested that it's a way of linking the online and offline experience of music. So let's say somebody goes to a concert, then there might be small numbers of collectibles that are sold at the same time. So let's say unique footage of that particular performance, or there might be some way of creating a digital file, a little piece of video, maybe a piece of performance art that is has information about what happened in that venue at that time. So the recording of one song from that show. So you buy a ticket, but you also buy this digital collectible. Number two, the other good thing is that things on the internet are really easy to steal, including medical records or legal documents. So with an NFT, if it makes piracy a lot harder, you're increasing scarcity, or what is in music is known as a drop culture. So a musician drops a work of art, so a painting or an image or an interview, and that can be copied and copied and copied. But hold on a second, if we can say that the original can be proven to be the original, maybe that's a way of taking things that are pirated and making them scarce. Number three, there are some musicians who are creating tokens for themselves. So I'll put one out in the chat a little bit later. But musicians, let's take Snoop Dogg. So let's say he creates this little token called a Snoop token. And these are like points or value points. And every time you do something in particular on his site, you earn these points, and then they can be spent on merchandise that is on his store. So you're incentivizing with these little sort of points activity in and around the musician. So the more you do around that musician, the more time you watch their videos, the more time you listen to their music, you get points, and then you can spend the points again on the musician's activity. Number four, which is actually very important, the more that you have the blockchain, these groups of people who are sharing these tokens and buying and selling these little objects among themselves, the less record labels start to become important. And here's a very important little organization called the Song That Owns Itself. So here you're getting into the area of what is called DAOs, or DAO, Decentralized Autonomous Organizations. And this is sort of the political aspect of blockchains, is that if people in a little network can prove what is true and what is not true, that we all agree that something happened to this object. So I vote, for example, and I can prove the vote is connected to me. You could say, well, the need for centralized organizations like record labels, maybe even like political parties, disappears. So blockchains are an incredibly important tool for grassroots or democratic organizations that don't want a hierarchy. You don't want one person proving the truth of anything. You don't want one person saying what is true or not, because you all share on the ledger the same historical record of what has happened to the things that you value. And the last one, very quickly, the last positive one, NFTs are a really good tool against piracy, against sampling, illegal sampling. So even though I'm giving you the example of music, because everybody wants to steal music, NFTs in the long term will have their value when it comes to stopping people lying about what has happened. For example, you can prove that a news story did come from a newspaper, it did come from the New York Times. And all of the things that were done, for example, in the last election, last presidential, no, already two elections ago with fake news, a lot of that activity was on Facebook, where organizations were creating fake newspapers with fake stories about fake outrage. But now it becomes easier technologically to say, hold on, this local newspaper was made up. These news stories were made up. I can't trace them back to the journalist whose name is on the bottom of the article. So to round things off, what's bad about NFTs? Number one, the sites where they're kept might go down. That's a problem. People forget their passwords to them. So even if you own one, the password you need to access might vanish. File formats might go out of currency. So, there are many people who can't access old file formats from the early days of the web. And that means they can't be opened. This is a boom market. So NFTs are going to have a very long value, but I'm not necessarily sure it's going to be as collectibles, because the monthly sales for NFTs and music are 94% down from their peak, from the moment when, a year ago, people were most excited. So it's way too much excitement, way too much disappointment, and we're going to level off at some point. Number three, it's speculative business. So people might be buying the music, they might be buying the musical assets because they think they're good investments, not necessarily because they like the artist. So that's a bit disappointing if you're a creator. Nifty Gateway has been hacked. So even if the technology is comforting because it's secure, as we've heard, because of social or human problems, people are losing the passwords, the unique passwords to access what they own. And lastly, the thing I want to say is that there's probably a confusion here between the emotional value of owning an NFT versus the market value. So people love to own something that's unique from their own particular artist, but it might not be the best particular investment. So I'll stop there, and I'll hand it back to the studio. But thanks very much again for inviting me.
Thank you. David, thank you for that awesome presentation. It is such an important topic, and you made it very, very, very clear and easy to understand and follow. I hope that we can benefit from your wisdom and your expertise in future programs. Thank you again. Sanjay, do you want to please?
David, this was an amazing presentation. You laid down some reasons why NFTs are being used. You've also laid down some reasons why there may be some issues with NFTs at the moment. And there's one aspect that came to my mind while you were talking, and that is the concept of DAOs and democratizing the ownership of these digital assets. So previously, if there was a digital asset only one person could own, and now probably hundreds or even thousands of people can own parts of that asset. Can you go more into that?
Yes. Linda's just dropped a question in the chat, so I'll get to that as well very quickly. Yes, one of the things that you're seeing, for example, again in the arts world, is people owning bits of an asset. That's what we're talking about, right? The fragmentation of ownership. So the example I gave you of the $69 million painting was something that was bought by one person. There's been some gossip about whether or not it was a real purchase, and actually it was a deal between the artist and the buyer to maybe create a bit of to drive up the appeal of this boom market. But placing that sort of issue aside, because it's more of a pending law case than anything we want to talk about. Let's say you want to invest in something that is important. So let's say, for example, some archives. Let's say that more and more people write online, and there is an artist, someone like Stephen King, who maybe tells us this isn't true, but let's say everything I've ever written is digital. And I'm now coming to the end of my life, and all my notebooks, I'm putting them up for sale. So everything I've ever written, all my letters, my emails, all my sketches, my drafts, and people want to buy it, but it just costs tens of millions of dollars. So what you can do now is split that ownership, and it's a bit like people, buying a racehorse together. That many people can now be part of a market. So that means you can invest in markets that you couldn't otherwise get into. So as we start to see more digital art, more digital literature, more digital music, and those things have value because we work less and less with, physical materials, less and less with vinyl, less and less with paper, and so on, that people will be able, who have very little money, to get into a market that they otherwise were just excluded from. And Linda's question, it seems like psychology is greatly tied to what value is placed on wanting an NFT. In the world of the arts, yeah, you could say that about any work of art, right? So why do people invest in antiques? Certainly people will invest in paintings that go out of fashion. I mean, the art market is a horrendous example of how fashion dictates value. But NFTs are going to have their real value if you can think about objects online that you want to protect. That's where it's going to come from. It's the only reason why it's popped up in music so quickly is because music got digitized so much quicker than most art forms, right? Ebooks on Amazon, they've caught up with paper, but music with Napster back in the early 90s, that was the first thing that people wanted to steal. So because of that, it's the first thing that people want to stop being stolen. So that's why you're absolutely right. When it comes to psychology, then in the art world, that's going to be unavoidable. But NFTs are really going to prove their value when you can think of other assets, and medical records is a good example, or your vote, that you say, I'm going to do that digitally, and I want to make really sure there's one of them, and I also want to make sure that people cannot steal it.
Thank you, David. When it comes to non-digital assets, let's suppose it's a property and that people would want to give chunks of it on a weekly basis. So timeshare is a good example of that. Airbnb is another example of that. Is that under the domain of NFTs or not?
Yes, because ownership is it's a matter of paperwork, right? It's a matter of legal status. So these NFTs can be used you can tie them to physical objects as well. So yeah, real estate's a really good example. So the paperwork that goes into real estate is what proves that you own it. Thankfully, we don't have to go around painting our name on every room. We don't have to go chiseling our name into the walls of the house. The way that you prove it is a document. So you want to make very sure that, unfortunately, human history is full of tragic examples of people lying about ownership. So you can prove the ownership of anything. Just digital assets are the easiest one to understand because they're digital to begin with. But anything in the physical world that has paperwork is also something that can be I'm going to make up a verb, NFTized. So I gave the example of a racehorse, which is, it's a physical horse. Or another example, I was given it's a rather strange example, but I went to a talk with somebody who was talking about breeding animals on farms, or if you imagine like pedigree dogs, or the dog's an object, it's not digitized, or breeding cattle. So I went to a talk where somebody was talking about bull sperm. So bulls are more expensive than cattle because there are less of them and you need them to breed the perfect cattle. Or racehorses, it's the same thing. So very often people will buy the sperm of a prize racehorse, a prize dog, a prize bull, and then it's delivered to them. You want to make damn sure that whatever you're being sent is what it is. Otherwise, you're screwed as a farmer or a breeder. You might be breeding the wrong horses, fake racehorses for the next 100 years. So yes, absolutely. Any physical object that needs to be proven as unique, one bull, one prize dog, one house, is something that you can use an NFT for as well. So they'll probably be working in the background of our lives all the time. So it's often been said that the best blockchains are ones you don't even see. It's just something that gives you peace of mind in the background.
David, going by this philosophy, all physical objects are unique, pretty much, unless it's a fungible object. Is it possible that we'll be in a world where almost all physical objects will be blockchained? Some of them will become tradable.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, and that almost goes back to Dante. Well, Dante's article had a very bold statement. Hold on a second. I'm just scrolling up the chat here. What was the title? Yes, how NFTs will change the content world. So, you know, Dante and I work in radically different areas, but we both think that this is going to be a real game changer in terms of proving that things are what they say they are. I mean, we've seen this in politics, right? That people often say now, journalists say, we're living in the post-truth world, where you can just make up stuff, and if you say it convincingly enough, or it looks like you're an authority, then people no longer know where to look for centers of authority. Is a politician who they think they are? Am I being scammed online? There's all types of places where people are confused now about the uniqueness of what they're being told. I'm being told 3 things, like vaccinations. Are they safe? Are they not safe? People don't know which of these sources is true. So if you can have a technology that says what you're looking at, what you're reading is what it says it is. It's called the New York Times. It's called your doctor's email. It's called your doctor's prescription. All of these things are in constant need of being proven as unique. So there was all the nonsense after the election about, you know, fake votes and states doing recounts and recounts and recounts. If you can say, this is my vote, and there's one of them, and I can prove technologically that it came from me, and I am also unique, that speeds up the democratic process. It just takes a lot of forgery and out of the picture. It guarantees people's voting rights. And if that technology is linking individuals to other individuals, then it takes out the role of government. You no longer need one central organization telling you what is true, because what is true about the election is proven by the technology. So our concept of hierarchical truth, that we have to be told by one person who is above us what is true and what is not true, this technology flattens that and says that the participants in an organization can prove to themselves that what they're exchanging, like votes, is they are unique, and they have proven provenance, that they come from the name on the voting form.
I have a question. I have a poster from the 2004 Olympics in Athens, Greece, that bears the signatures of all of the gold medal women's basketball players who swept gold that year. I was at the gold medal party, and a couple of players learned that I had, well, they all signed it, but there was only 2 or 3 posters that were signed, and I have one of them. A couple of people have wanted a copy of that poster, and I have given them a copy. How would I prove that I have one of the original posters? And would you include the terminology NFT in your answer?
Sure. So you're in a tricky position because you have a piece of paper technology. Somebody made a poster, and when you gave them copies, what were they, scans, and you sent them a file, or color Xeroxes, or what did you do?
The copies were made at Kinko's with the same size copies. Yes.
Okay. So your example is all physical, right? You've got paper, and then you made more paper, and so on and so forth. So that's a different type of proof. You would need to prove that, well, first of all, yours would have ink on the signature, right? So that's one type of proof. The second proof, and this is where there's a lot of forgery in sports collectibles, is are the signatures that they say they are. So it's not really possible for you to prove the origin of your paper poster using this technology. What you need to do at the moment that it is created, link it to yourself. So let's say, for example, you online have an identity and we can prove that. So let's say it's your website and there are multiple ways online of proving that the website does belong to you and you publish your stuff on that website. You then say, I, from this place that I prove is mine, I'm making a digital file called an NFT, and then you can buy it from me. I am making one. And then you can then sell it, and other people might make more and more copies. But the person who bought it from you can always say, I have the original file and I have proof that it was made by the person who either signed it or printed it. So that's the appeal for sports collectibles, is that if you make it as a digital card, it will have a digital signature, but we can prove, because the sportsman made it through us, whatever, the batter, the pitcher, the swimmer, whatever, they made it with us. And so we can prove who made it. But yes, if you've got a paper copy, then proving that it was the original would involve going to somebody very different. You would go to an antiques expert or to a sporting expert, and they would verify the physical signature. So it's exactly the problem that you would have that is removed by the technology. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, great.
Digitalization really helps in this case. Based on
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's why that link I sent out to the company Panini, they're jumping into sports collectibles because A, it's a massive market, but the level of forgery in sports collectibles, especially with things that are signed, baseballs and shirts and so on, it's ridiculous. I'd be very scared to invest in baseball cards. Well, first of all, because I grew up in the land of soccer, so my interest is somewhere else. But it's precisely because of the high level of fake signatures in sports collectibles that this technology has proven very attractive. So Dante mentioned one sports collectible company. I've mentioned another. It's a logical place to go because unfortunately people steal and lie a lot. And the blockchain makes lying very difficult because you can say, yesterday this thing was here, and then it was here, and then it was here, and you can trace it back earlier to the people who made it in the first place.
Okay. Let's thank you, David. Thank you, Sanjay. Thank you for the questions. Again, we're really grateful, David.